The room fell silent. Cameras zoomed in. Microphones caught the faintest shuffle of papers. And every person in that chamber leaned forward, sensing something extraordinary had just happened. Jim Jordan, the fiery congressman who built his career on shouting down opponents, had suddenly run out of words. His voice, usually so sharp and relentless, cracked with fury one last time, and then came the silence. It wasn't the silence of respect. It was the silence of a man who had just been outmatched, outmaneuvered, exposed in front of the nation. In that instant, the balance of power shifted. Jordan had come in swinging, convinced he could bulldoze yet another opponent with interruptions, theatrics, and sheer volume. But across the table sat Jasmine Crockett, a freshman Democrat from Texas, with a legal mind sharpened in the courtroom and a presence that radiated unshakable calm. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to match his theatric. She needed only one precise line of questioning, one piercing truth, to stop him cold. The chamber could feel it. The clash had been building for minutes, Jordan pressing harder, trying to steamroll his way to dominance. But the more he talked, the more his arguments unraveled. And then came Crockett's words, delivered with clarity and precision. Words that cut through the bluster and left Jordan's own contradictions hanging in the air like a head fog. The silence stretched. Allies who once nodded vigorously at Jordan's every word now shifted uncomfortably. His usual confidence, the pounding fist, the relentless interruptions, evaporated. Viewers at home felt it. Millions watching saw the moment arrogance collided with competence. Noise collided with knowledge, and for once, the noise lost. On social media, the clip would soon hashtags, memes, and disbelief would spread like wildfire. But in that first frozen instant, inside that the story wasn't about trending moments. It was about power meeting. And Jasmine, calm and composed, had just proven she could silence one of Washington's loudest voices. But to understand why this silence mattered, we need to understand the magnitude of what unfolded. We have to look at the stage on which this drama played. Oversight hearings are not just political. They are the heartbeat of accountability in a democracy. When conducted with seriousness, they shine a light, expose corruption, and reaffirm that no one, not even the most powerful, is a. But when hijacked for soul, they become something far more, a circus that erodes faith in the very system designed to protect. Jim Jordan had made a career out of turning these hearings into his own personal. He came armed not with airtight legals, but with volume, theatrics, and carefully manufactured. To Jordan, the hearing room wasn't sacred. It was his. Every raised voice, every point, every scowl was designed not to seek truth, but to generate clips for media. He was less later. More yet, while his antics often rattled witnesses and even fellow leakers, this was different. Sitting across from him was Crockett, a woman forged not in the echo chambers of partisan, but in the crucible. She carried into that chamber the weight of countless hours spent parsing reals, defending real people, confronting real cases. Where Jordan leaned on bluster, she saw. Where Jordan wielded noise, she watched. The stakes. At issue wasn't just a clash of personalities, but the very credibility of congressional oath. Would it be remembered as another match, another episode of K-drama? Or would it become something far more sequential, a moment when arrogance with authority, when performative rage collided with constitutional principle? Everyone sensed it. This was not destined to be just another Washington. The tension in the chamber carried different weight, like the hum of electricity before lightning strike. Staffers shifted uneasy seats. Reporters who had come expecting routine sound bites scribbled fast notebooks. Even members of Congress who usually tuned out during Jordan's tirades looked away. Something about the way Crockett held herself, steady, patient, precise, signaled that she wasn't Jordan's game. She was here to expose it. And that is what made the silence to extraordinary. Because when Jim Jordan's voice faltered, it wasn't just one losing his footing. It was a whisper. The exhaustion of empty outrage when confronted with substance. Millions at home watching the clips would later feel vindicated, exhilarated, as if justice had briefly leapt off the page of the Constitution and landed in the committee room. The stakes of democracy are not always decided in grand speeches or reforms. Sometimes they are revealed in imitation. When a single exchange lays bare the difference between those who wield responsibly and the weapon. Jasmine understood that. Jim Jordan did not, and Jim Jordan did not arrive and build bridges. From the very beginning, he cultivated a reputation as a bulldog. A man who thrived on confrontation, who measured influence not in legislation passed, shouted. He wasn't the type to master the intricacies of policy or nuance of law. No, Mark was simple. Overwhelm, dominate, and bully until the silent. His allies praised as relentless. His saw something darker. It's a man whose brand of politics thrived on tearing others down rather than the country up. In hearing after hearing, Jordan became infamous for witnesses, cutting off colleagues, and drowning out the very process sworn to protect. Where others saw congressional oversight as an element of accountability, saw it as a stage. Performance, bigger the headlines, behind the theatrics, pattern. A disregard for the very legal claim to champion. Jordan branded himself defender of law and order, yet time and again missed legal nuance, over basic procedure, and wielded his gavel like a hammer, tool of justice. For him, not something sacred. It was a prop, a convenient talking point, to be bent or broken political gain. Consider his various clashes. He berated witnesses who dared to challenge him, often speaking over them, so that their testimony lost in the noise. Accountability. Yet when confronted about his own record, including allegations of negligence during his at Ohio State, his tone shifted from righteous fury to evasive dismissal. The contrast was glaring. Condemn others, yet unscrutiny himself. This was the contrast of Jim Jordan. Obsessed with the optics of strength, but the foundations of law. A man who wrapped himself in the language of the Constitution while bulldozing the enshrines. His entire approach to politics summed up in one word: performative. And performance had carried him far. Capable of the sound bites. Partisan echo amplified his tirades. His interruptions weren't seen as but as signs of toughness. In an age where spectacle often outshines substance, Jordan became a star. But stardom built up has a fatal flaw. It falters when confronted with real knowledge, real composure. That flaw was on full display in the hearing that would define history with Jasmine Crockett. Jordan entered the room with the same it carried for years. He leaned back in his chair, sharpened his questions like weapons, and readied himself for yet another exchange. He was certain this young congresswoman, new to the chamber, lacking his years of notoriety, would wilt under pressure. To him, it wasn't even a contest. Arrogance blinds. And Jordan's arrogance had grown unchecked after yeking volume for victory. He failed to recognize that the person sitting across from him was not just another his rehearsed outrage. She was someone who had spent her career in courtrooms where bluster is under cross-examination, where precision and dismantle noise. The cracks in Jordan's facade go almost immediately. Each time he interrupted, calmly reclaimed her time. Each time he dismissed her, earned with sharper clarity. The trick on others suddenly rang hollow. Viewers watching sense it. The rhythm was the balance shifting. The congressman thrived on putting others on the defense, now found himself stumbling. For years, Jordan had perfected the role of antagonist in American politics, loud, relentless. But every villain meets their foil. The counter turns their strengths into weakness. And in this moment, Jordan's greatest weapon, his unchecked arrogance, was about to become his downfall. But across the table sat someone whose entire life prepared her for this fight. All began with the man who thought he could bulldoze his way through the Constitution. Jasmine Crockett did not rise to national attention by accident. Her story is not one of privilege, shortcuts, or the insulation of power. It is the story of a woman born into working-class values, raised on the belief that dignity and determination matter more than wealth or connections. From her earliest years, Crockett understood that to survive in America as a black woman, she would need to be twice as sharp, twice as prepared, and utterly unafraid to speak truth in the face of arrogance. Her path was not one of elite boarding schools or family dynasty. It was grit, persistence, and a refusal to be intimidated. When others might have bowed their heads, she lifted hers. When others stayed quiet to avoid conflict, she leaned into her voice. That voice would become her most powerful weapon, not in its volume, but in its clarity. Law called to her early. She saw injustice all around her. People without money punished more harshly. Marginalized communities overlooked. Entire neighborhoods left voiceless in systems that claimed to serve. Instead of despairing, Crockett chose to fight. She put herself through the rigor of legal training, learning not just statutes and precedents, but the art of dismantling arguments with surgical precision. For her, the courtroom was not just a place to win cases, it was a place to affirm dignity, to give those without power a defender who could not be bullied into silence. In trial, After trial, Crockett earned her reputation. She didn't grandstand. She didn't need. Her calm command of facts and laws spoke louder than theatrics ever could. Opposing counsel would storm and posture, but she knew how to let an argument hang just long enough before slicing it apart with one pointed. She embodied the discipline of patience, the artistry of the mastery of subtlety. That training was not just it was about survival in rooms designed to doubt her. Crockett knew the sting of being underestimated, of being told implicitly and explicitly that she did not. And every time, she proved that resilience became her. Where others saw obstacles, she saw an opportunity to reveal the truth beneath. When she entered politics, she carried that same spirit into the halls. She did not arrive to play. She arrived to represent the people who rarely saw themselves reflected in those. Immigrants, working families, people of color, women who carried generations of struggle. She walked into Congress with the posture of someone who had already fought battles far tougher than partisans. And what made her confrontation with Jim Jordan so Crockett wasn't just another Democrat in the room. She was the embodiment of a different power, not formative, but bold. Not loud, but lethal. Every courtroom she had, every witness she did, every cross-examination she had delivered had prepared her for this moment. She knew how to cut through intimidation because she had faced it 104. She knew how to silence arrogance because she had spent her career exposing. And unlike Jordan, who thrived, Crockett didn't need the spotlight to her. The spotlight found her because the truth did it. Her presence was more than perseverance. It was nation. For every young girl who had been told, her voice was sharp. For every immigrant family who feared their story, for every community treatable. Crockett. Preparation and courage can silence even the loudest. She carried them with chamber. She spoke not, but as a vessel of. That was why Jordan's bluster collapsed so dramatic presence. He was a man playing a role, repeat performance. She was a woman who lived the words. She didn't need heard. Her voice resonated because it was rooted in lived reality by law, an unshaken. So when Jordan launched his tirade, she obliterated his case by point. The tension in the chamber enough to cut. Jim Jordan leaned forward in his chair, the veins in his neck straining as he bore his microphone. His interruption rapid fire, like a boxing match. He raised his voice with each sentence, as if sheer volume could substance. To his supporters, familiar ground. Jordan in attack mode, relentless and unyielding. But to any close attention, thing was different. Things weren't landing. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett sat with the composure and litigator. She didn't flinch, didn't roll her eyes, didn't let her posture betray a flicker of irritation. Instead, she waited, calm, poised. And Jordan cut her off, she paused, letting his words hang in the air like wild swing to connect. Her silence became a counterpunch, reminding everyone that noise does equal dominance. The audience in the chamber could feel the shift. Staffers shuffled uncomfortably, reporters lifted their notepads. Even some of Jordan's allies stole glances at one another. They had seen performance before, but the usual wasn't working. Crockett's stillness carried Jordan's fury, just harder. Raising his voice, it nearly cracked. He pointed across the table, gesturing wildly to provoke a reaction. But the more animated he became, the smaller he looked. Crockett didn't take the bait. Instead, she delivered short, precise remarks, each sharper than the last. Her words landed like calculated blows, exposing the height of Jordan's outrage. The exchange began to resemble a sparring match. Fighter swings recklessly, exhausting himself. Other conserves energy, waiting for the perfect opening. Jordan was swinging wild to assert control. Crockett was studying him, dissecting his rhythm, preparing a strike that would end the round. Viewers felt the drama building. Every interruption by Jordan was met with refusal to be rattled, every attempt at dominance growing desperation. The camera lingered on Jordan's face, his jaw tightening, his eyes narrowed, his confidence slipping. He had stepped into the ring, another easy bout. Instead, he was facing an opponent who could not be shaken by now. Their chamber was leaning in. The background murmurs had faded. It was as if everyone knew they were on the verge of something unforgettable. Crockett's was not weakness. It was strategy. He was letting Jordan reveal himself, his arrogance, his lack of control, his disregard for procedure, and with each passing second, performance grew wider. Jordan's voice boomed one last time, with frustrated energy. He expected to dominate the moment, drown out his opponent with noise. But what followed was silence born of intimidation. It was silence born of anticipation, as everyone would see how Crockett would respond. And then, in a moment, millions of times online. Crockett delivered a counterattack that changed everything. The moment Jim Jordan paused, expecting to the conversation forward, Jasmine Crockett leaned so slightly into her microphone. Her voice didn't rise to meet his. It stayed steady, measured, that contrast alone shifted the mood. One man shouting to fill the air. One woman speaking with the authority of someone who knew the law stood firmly on her side. She began by untangling his argument piece by piece. Jordan had ranted about overreach, about supposed misconduct, but his claims were stitched together with conjecture and half-truths. Crockett chose her first words carefully, letting them cut with precision. Congressman, with all due respect, what you just said doesn't even align with the most basic principles of the law you claim to defend. There was a pause. The audience in the chamber registered it instantly. Reporters' pens scratched faster across their pads. The room seemed to shrink, every ear tuning to her voice. Crockett wasn't just responding. She was setting a trap, brick by brick, building a case in real time. She cited precedent. She cited statutes. And then, with a calm that bordered on surgical, she asked Jordan to clarify a claim he had just made. He tried to interrupt. He tried to bulldoze forward with volume. But each time, Crockett calmly reclaimed her time, her composure unwavering. The more he tried to wrestle the narrative back, the more obvious it became that he was out of his depth. At one point, Jordan's voice cracked again as he insisted on a distorted interpretation of constitutional authority. Crockett tilted her head slightly, waited for him to stop, and then delivered the line that sent a ripple through the room. So, if you actually practiced law instead of performing politics, you would know that what you're saying has no legal standing whatsoever. Gasps erupted in the chamber. A few muffled laughs slipped through the tension, quickly hushed but undeniable. Jordan blinked rapidly, caught between outrage and disbelief. He opened his mouth to fire, but nothing. The silence stretched, the very silence that had framed the opening. Crockett pressed, methodical and merciless in her logic. She outlined the difference between legal evidence and partisan speculation. She reminded him, with precision, of the responsibilities of the Oversight Committee under the Constitution. She even quoted back his own past statements, exposing contradictions that left him visibly. Each reveal landed like a body, not flashy, but devastating in its act. The cameras caught. Jordan's jaw clenched. His hands fidgeted with his eyes darted toward allies on the panel, as if searching for, but no rest. The more he flailed, the deeper he sank into the quicksand Crockett had prepared. Then came the true mic drop. Crockett, after dismantling each of his lick, and let the weight of her words. She spoke directly to the principal. This committee is not your personal. It is not a place for shouting. It exists to hold power accountable, and if you can't respect that, then perhaps it isn't others who need schooling in constitution. Perhaps. The silence that followed was moved. No. Even Jordan's closest allies kept their eyes fixed downward, unwilling to meet gaze. The force of her words was not in their volume but in their untruth. Social. Later replay this sequence. Crockett's mantling, the sharpness of her phrasing, the visible collapse of Jordan's confidence. But in that room, the effect was immediate raw. Reporters glanced at one another with brows. Some staffers, a few members from Crockett's side leaned back, satisfaction flickering across faces. Jordan, for once, back. His mouth open, closed. He shifted in his seat, papers rustling in his hands, searching death-footing. But the more he squirmed, the game was over. He silenced, not shouting, but by the inescapable. Crockett, meanwhile, composed, not gloating, not smirking. She understood the moment. She hadn't just changed. She had run deeper. That arrogance can truth, and that performative rage collapses when met with dignity. The audience at home would later describe it as a out punch, the political equivalent of a mic drop across the country. But for those inside the chamber, it was a spectacle. Indication. For once, bluster had been met with brilliance, veiled. Jordan sat deflated. His usual swagger was gone, his trademark muted. He had no choice but to live for him. And the silence condemned him louder than it could. Crockett closed her bind, her eyes steady, unbroken. She didn't announce her victory. Whom already knew. Was already knew. And deep down, Jim Jordan knew, but Crockett's mic drop didn't just Jordan in that room. It set off shots across the nation. The hearing may have ended Congress, but the moment Jim Jordan fell silent, Crockett's words, its second life. Within minutes, the clip was online, bouncing from one platform to another, exploding across Twitter and YouTube. The silence that had stunned the chamber now reverberated through tons of screens, magnified by captions, reaction, emojis, soundtracks. On Twitter, hashtags like hashtag Jordan silenced and hashtag Croc ended by the hour multiplied. Jordan frozen mid-sputter beside poised expression, gifs looping his mouth over words coming out. Some edited the footage into mock boxing matches with Croc the knockout blow. Others her words over music, transforming the into an anthem. For progressives, cathartic. Finally, someone stood up to the bully and won, but the praise wasn't to one political lane. Even moderate voices, those who usually kept their distance from that, admitted something extraordinary. Legal experts on cable panels dissected Crockett's precision, marveling at her ability to dismantle Jordan without raising her voice. That, one scholar declared, is what it looks like spectacle. Even couldn't find their footing. Conservative commentators who normally rallied behind Jordan stumbled for talking points. A few tried to dismiss Crockett as overprepared, a phrase that only highlighted of their defense. Others simply ignored the exchange altogether, retreating into mirrored Jordan's own. Meanwhile, Crockett's out in full force. Democratic colleagues tweeted their support, hailing her as a rising star, voice of clarity in a often drowned by noise. Grassroots activists celebrated the moment as proof that dignity still mattered. Truth could still cut through bluster, the flood of support than partisan cheerleading. It was relief, hope, and vindication rolled into one. Leighton seized the moment with glee. Monologues replayed Jordan's silence in slow motion, pausing to let audit his stunned expression. One compared it to watching him deflate in real time. Another called it the sound of noise in its place. Audiences roared, not just at the comedy, but at the shared rhythm of a cultural moment. Its reach grew exponential. Teenagers who rarely tuned into congressional mixed it on TikTok. Lawyers shared it in professional forums as an example with poise under pressure. Teachers played it in civics classes to illustrate the difference between political and real oversight. Words transcended the hearing room. The conversation. For Jim, the aftermath was brutal. The silence he had in the room followed him everywhere. Reporters peppered him with questions about playing the clip in their coverage. His usual allies in conservative media formed defenses at best. Unwilling to amplify a moment that revealed his vulnerability. In the arena he had dominated through sheer force of will, Jordan found himself on the defensive, the weight of ridicule, the argument he had failed to, for Jasmine Crockett. The ripple effect was profound. She wasn't just a celebrous woman who silenced Jim Jordan. She was as a symbol of something larger. Commentators framed her as the new generation of leadership. Sharp, prepared, willing to bow to intimidation. It wasn't just about personal victory. It was about representation. It's about a voice for communities too often ignored. The wave carried emotional resonance. For immigrant families, for women of color, for working-class communities watching from living rooms and phone screens, Crockett's dismantling was more than plort. It was validation. It was proof that intelligence and prep could triumph over arrogance. That the overlooked tall against the blustering elite. As the memes continued and the hashtags refused to fade, one truth became undeniable. This moment had shifted the narrative. It wasn't just another clip, endless churn of political drama. It was a turning point that revealed the fragility of performative outrage when it the light of composure and law. Yet beyond the noise of Twitter, something deeper emerged from this clash. When the noise finally faded, what lingered was not just a political skirmish, but the power of truth over arrogance. Jasmine had done more than silence Jim Jordan. She had the entire meaning of the exchange. In that hearing room, she had knowledge will always outweigh noise. It will always rise above bluster. And that justice will always eclipse intimidation. Her calm dismantling of Jordan's arguments carried a universal resonance. It wasn't simply about Democrat versus Republican, freshman congresswoman versus seasoned committee chair. It was about what happens when preparation meets performance, when patience confronts provocation, when substance is pitted against spectacle. In that contest, Crockett showed the country that the quiet strength of truth is more powerful than the loudest arrogance. For many watching, it wasn't just political validation, it was personal. How many times have ordinary people been shouted down by those who mistake volume for authority? How many times have immigrants, workers, women, marginalized communities been told they don't belong, only to prove through resilience and brilliance that they do? Crockett's moment was their moment too. She showed that when you refuse to be intimidated, when you answer arrogance with clarity, you don't just survive the confrontation, you transform it. The moral was clear. Justice doesn't shout. It stands. It doesn't it reveals. And in revealing, it exposes the emptiness of those who rely on noise to hide their lack of substance. Crockett's words reminded America that power isn't in who speaks the loudest, but in who speaks the truth with conviction. Even more inspiring was her restraint. She didn't gloat. She didn't descend to Jordan's level. She carried herself with composure, demonstrating that dignity is not weakness, but strength in its purest form. Her victory was not just in silencing, but in embodying the principle that leadership grounded in justice and respect will always resonate more deeply than leadership built anger and evil. For those weary of the chaos of American politics, Crockett's performance was it suggested that there is still space for leaders who prepare, who respect the law, who choose substance over showmanship. It reminded the country that democracy is not sustained by those who scream the loud, but by those who protect its values with steady hands and voices in for especially young women of. Watching Crockett hold her ground was transformative. She didn't just win an argument. She modeled a way of standing tall in rooms designed to diminish. She carried into that chamber the unspoken stories of countless, and in doing, she expanded what was possible for those who will follow. The legacy of that moment stretched far beyond it became a symbol of resilience, of intellect, it told America that in the face of bluster and arrogance, dignity is not only enough, it is and that's why this wasn't just a moment it was a lesson for. Jim Jordan came into that hearing, certain his trademark fury would decay. But instead of silencing his opponent, he found himself silenced by Jasmine, a woman whose calm mastery of the law exposed his bluster for what it was, empty. In that room, arrogance collapsed under the. This was more than a heated exchange. It was a reminder that knowledge matters, that preparation matters, that dignity. Crockett didn't just. She defended the very principles that keep democracy alive. And in doing so, she showed millions of Americans that you don't need to shout. You need only to stand. That is why this moment resonated. Because it validated something but too often. Justice doesn't roar in rage, it speaks in. And when arrogance tries to bulldoze its way through the dignity will always rise. Now that is what we do. Do we let it fade into the endless churns, or do we carry it forward? If you believe in truth over noise, in law over spectacle, in dignity over, then this is your chance to be part. Share this story. Let it remind others that justice still voice, and it can round out. And if you want more stories where arrogance falls and stands tall, subscribe, engaged, and join us in amplifying the matter, because accountability doesn't happen. It happens rise together.